All right, good morning, everybody, and welcome back to True Crime Loser. I hope you're doing well this morning. So, today I'm going to go over the absolute trash fire of an interview that Prince Andrew did with the BBC. And I would say most people that watched this interview afterwards were left with the question of why would you do that to yourself? Oh my God, what a bloodbath. 10 minutes in, I was watching it like this, like, oh man. And about 20 to 35 minutes in, I just had my hands on my head going, what? Oh my God. But let me set this up first. So, 2 weeks ago, a former New York City chief medical examiner named Dr. Michael Baden did an interview, and he said he was hired by Epstein's brother to go to the autopsy, and he's saying that he still thinks that the bones broken in the neck, the injuries, are much more in line with homicide. Shouldn't surprise you at all. Most people didn't really think suicide. The people that were saying suicide are also the people that had a camera in his cell, but it just miraculously stopped working. And also that had guards that were sleeping. And also he had a cellmate, which could have shed light on the situation, but he was moved, giving Epstein the cell alone. And so the whole Epstein didn't kill himself has been trending and memeing and going nuts. And the big joke is whenever you're commenting on something on the internet, even if it's unrelated, you say what you're going to comment and then you say, and Epstein didn't kill himself. I'm sure you've seen a comment like that. So that's been back in the news. Also, very recently, a reporter from ABC, in a hot mic situation, either in between takes or after it takes, someone leaked footage of her being like, I've had this story for 3 years. We had Clinton, the palace wanted to squash it. She said, Prince Andrew's name came up. And she was saying the brass at ABC were saying, that's a boring story. That's stupid. No one knows who Jeffrey Epstein is. Just let's do something that people are interested in. What's funny, it's like, you're the news. Can't we tell them? Can't we tell the people who Epstein is? We are the news. It's just a couple sentences to give people the background, and then you just go from there. It's not too hard. I picture that reporter going into the bigwig ABC's office and being like, sir, we have an unbelievable story. This guy, Jeffrey Epstein, could be a pedophile. He might be a Satanist. And as she's running out the story, he's listening, but her voice is starting to get further and further and further away as he's remembering the time on Epstein's Island when he was in like a conga line with a bunch of... And she's like, sir? And he's like, oh, yes, okay, yeah, no, I think that's a stupid story. I don't think anyone knows who Epstein is, so just bury it. And she's sitting there going, what? So those two things have happened recently, and then late last week, I don't know why, Prince Andrew sat down with the BBC for an hour, and here we go. I've never seen so many just puzzled looks and... yeah. If someone edited all his deep breaths and just... really? Just all the squirming and puzzledness and... So he sits down and goes, why talk now? It's a very good question. He's like, there's no real good time to do it. And it's like, take a play out of the Clintons' playbook and just don't. And then just kill everybody. So why talk now? Doesn't have too much of an answer for it. It's never a good time. And I'm trying to think, why would the strategy be able to talk now? And the only thing I can come up with is, even if it's just a total, complete disaster, bloodbath like this was, at least the statement's out there. Everybody's going to commentate it for a little bit, and then it can start... at least there's a statement out there so people can't be like, whatever happened with this, Prince Andrew, whatever happened with this Virginia Roberts? There's a picture. And that's the other thing. So Clinton and Prince Andrew's names have come up as this thing has moved along by far more than anyone else. But the difference is Prince Andrew has the picture. So in Ghislaine Maxwell's house years ago, there's a picture of him with his arm around a 17-year-old woman named Virginia Roberts, who is saying that she was trafficked by Epstein, had sex with Prince Andrew 3 times. They hung out in London a bunch of times. There's that picture. Oh, I bet he wishes that picture didn't exist. So he has this picture to deal with. So I think probably the interview is just, even if it's going to be brutal, get a statement out there explaining that picture, and then just hopefully slowly, with all the other news cycle stuff, buries it. All right. So it's like, why are you talking now? Never a good time. And then he paints the picture that, I was close with Epstein, but I was more close with Ghislaine Maxwell, my friend, and she was dating him. So, we were friends, and it was her boyfriend. I got to be nice to the boyfriend. That's kind of the attitude. But as you can see, that was a terrible strategy to go with as we move further along. And then, it's hard to explain because she's like, well, you stayed at his house, multiple times a year. And he's like, yeah, we met, and he was like, hey, even if I'm not around, when you're in town, stay at my place. I got this place. And if you haven't seen the townhouse that he's talking about here in New York, I did a video on it. I'll put it in the description where I walk up to the townhouse. We look at it on the outside. But Epstein's had this massive townhouse in New York. And so he was like, yeah, I would stay there. He let me, stay. It was easy. And then as a way to justify that, he was saying the thing is Epstein had this extraordinary ability to bring together extraordinary people. There were academics, and there were, and the interviewer goes, was that his appeal, the academics? And Prince Andrew's like, yes, that's the appeal. It was the academics. We would go to these academic parties with all these young academics, and he didn't say that, but it's just hilarious. Yes, that was the appeal. All of the just academics. Man, nothing like going to a party on an island with some nice academics. And so the interviewer is slowly starting before Epstein's allegations and being like, you guys hung out a lot. And then, so then she goes, well, you invited her to the royal parties. It was like one of Prince Andrew's daughters, some party for his daughter at the castle. And, or I don't know if they call it the castle, but some party. And it's like, well, you invited him, you brought him into the royal family. And he was like, yeah, I invited Ghislaine, and he was like a +1. It was no big deal. And, he never seemed like a pedophile. And, so then she's like, well, okay, in 2006, an arrest warrant was issued for like sex trafficking or doing horrible stuff to kids, and you invited them. And again, he's like, no, it's Ghislaine, just a +1, this whole thing. And then it's like, all right, well, in 2008, he was convicted. And he's like, yes, okay. So he was convicted, and we did not talk during that time, And then here's where it starts to get bad. And it's like, okay, he was released in July 2010. A mere couple months later, you went to stay with him again in his New York townhouse. So he was convicted of trafficking or whatever children, and he was released, and then a few months later, you went and stayed with a convicted child predator. And his story was that he, because he's a leader and because of leadership, he thought that, well, because Epstein is such a bad guy and traffics children, I better go and stay with him and tell him that we should not be seen in public together. Because of his whole child trafficking thing, we shouldn't be seen together anymore because of leadership. And then because of that leadership, he flies to New York, one of the media capitals of the world, and then he goes on a walk with Epstein in Central Park, one of the most public, easily photographed places in the world, to tell him that we shouldn't be seen in public anymore. There's people that have done things in my industry where I'm like, that's gross. I don't want to associate with them anymore. It's like, that's a deal breaker moment for me. And you know what? I don't fly to their place wherever they live to tell them that. I just stop talking to them. I just go, okay, yeah, that person sucks, and I'm not on their side anymore. It's... And also his whole thing about, I was just friends with Ghislaine, and he's like a +1 thing. And so it's just proximity type. It's like, well, if he's just Ghislaine's boyfriend and he kind of liked him and whatever, why would you fly? So that whole strategy just tanks hard. And then she presses him. Why stay there? You could have called him. You're going... Because he kept being like, well, I was doing a number of other things in New York. That was one thing on the agenda. I just wanted to get in and let Epstein know because of leadership that we can't hang anymore. And she's like, but why stay there? He just goes, it was a convenient place to stay. This guy has access to unlimited wealth and power and is a prince, and people couldn't book a hotel room. Even if you like that neighborhood, just stay around the corner. You're in New York City. There are hotels. There are places you could have lined up some real nice arrangements, and it was convenient. Listen, I know he was a child trafficker, but the convenience of the place, I'm telling you, the place, it just is right there. And he's starting to tank pretty bad at this point, and there's a lot of just like puzzled looks, like, oh, and it's like his fucking like extra chin is just really hanging at this point. And at this point he goes, I admit fully. And it's like, okay, here we go. Shh, he's admitting something fully. Here we go. What is it? He goes, I admit fully, my judgment was colored by my tendency to be too honorable. All right. Nothing like when your judgment gets colored because your tendency to be too honorable. My girlfriend was half listening while I was listening to this, and he goes, my judgment was colored by and she goes, lust for young women, and then in like the pause, and then he goes, by my tendency to be too honorable. It was cracked me up. And then it was funny, she was like, but he's also saying, he's like, but Epstein didn't act the way I'm a prince, so when I'm there, he probably just was on his best behavior, though. If you're someone like me, he's saying someone very powerful, he was like, people act different around me. If they're a child trafficker, they're going to take a day break and not traffic. It was convenient because of leadership. So he was saying, while I was there, it just seemed like a big house. People were coming and going. And she was like, well, there was a photo taken during that time when you were staying there with Epstein with a lot of underage girls. And he's just kind of like, I don't know. And then she was like, I forgot his name, but she was like a big literary guy and says his name was there. And his facial expression when she's saying this is hilarious. She's like, yeah, this literary guy named was also there. And he goes, really? And she goes, yeah. And he said that he saw you there that day getting a foot rub by a young Russian woman. And Andrew at this point is just really just eating it. And he just goes, no, nope, that didn't happen. And then it just becomes a total bloodbath. So it gets to the her asking him about Virginia Roberts, who is the 17-year-old in the picture. There's a whole FBI investigation happening here in the United States over it, and so they get into that. And so she's asking him, the Virginia Roberts, and I have no recollection of any of it, type of thing. And they zoom back, and his whole body and feet and hands are just worming as he's just like, I've gone over and over and over again. I've gone over it. I can't recollect it. It didn't happen. I've gone over and over it. And so the night in question is Virginia Roberts said they went to, out clubbing in London. Was saying that she was saying that he was sweating profusely, dancing, just, sweating like you're hanging out with a 17-year-old. And he was like, no. There's a lot of problems with Virginia's story. See, because one of them being that at that time I couldn't sweat. I overdosed on adrenaline when I was shot at, I think in a war, and I couldn't sweat. So, along with many other problems with her story, I couldn't sweat. And then it was like, what about what were you doing that night? And you know what's crazy is I don't know too much about the whole Pizzagate thing, but there's a whole, I think it started as a joke, but there's a lot of really bizarre coincidences around it. But people think that this whole pedophile ring, they have these code language, and pizza is a big part of it. And I bet they went nuts because they were like, all right. She goes, well, do you remember where you were that night where she's accusing you of, where you had sex with her? And he goes, yes, I was eating pizza with the children. And so he was saying he took his kids to eat pizza, but it's just that is a weird answer. And then they get to the picture. The picture. And so he's already said that I was good friends with Ghislaine Maxwell, not, Epstein a little bit, but Ghislaine, we were great friends. And so Ghislaine is in this picture. And so it's him and her, and then Ghislaine in the background in Ghislaine's house. So we can't say. So they're like, what's with that picture? And he's like, no one can prove it's real. He's like, it's a picture of a picture. And she's like, well, do you think it's real? He's like, I don't know. I don't remember. I have no idea. And it's not going well, saying that he just doesn't think the picture is real because his friend's in it. It's in her house. It doesn't seem... It's not like he's out on the street waving and someone doctored in. You're in your friend's house with child traffickers. And then one of the funniest moments, and he was like, well, here's the thing is that picture was taken upstairs. This is another problem with the story. It was taken upstairs, and the thing is I never went upstairs in Ghislaine's. Was the living room upstairs? Yes, the living room was upstairs. See, I never went upstairs. I just was always downstairs in the house. And it's just why did you do this interview? You are blowing it horribly. And then, all right, so 35 minutes in, she's like, everybody that talks to Epstein just says you to be around him, you couldn't not have known. You went to his place. You stayed with him. You went to the island. You did all this stuff. There's no way that you could not have known. And he just is like, blah, blah, blah. And So then she's saying, okay, so there's an FBI investigation happening in the United States. Would you be willing to give a testimony about the Virginia Roberts thing under oath, or would you be willing to talk? And this maybe is the peak, just bloodbath answer. He just goes, well, I'm just going to read the quote. He goes, well, I'm like everyone else, and that's another thing. The amount of stuttering and just rambling is insane. So he goes, well, I'm like everyone else, and I would have to take all the legal advice that there ever was before I was to do that sort of thing. So he says, I would need, and he's just kind of rambling, trying to figure out something to say. I would need all of the legal advice that there ever was before I would and he goes, before I would do that sort of thing. And he kind of makes this face of just like, ugh, before I would just do that sort of thing, like testify under oath about a child. Ugh. Ugh. Just the amount of ums and one time he said that 4 times in a row, I wrote down. But and then he kind of settles in, and it's totally incoherent, but he starts talking about this like foundation that he's setting up. I really had no idea what he was talking about, how it's going to help kids or something, and it's like, dude, shut up. And let me see if I have anything else. Yeah, it's just I can't sweat, and I've gone over and over and over again, and it didn't happen. But I'm going to cut it off there. Check out this interview. It was like I said, just a complete disaster for Prince Andrew. And I pictured when he was just rambling at that part where he's like, I would definitely need all of the legal advice that is in the universe. I pictured just the very powerful royals in some room watching it on TV just being like, oh no, what have we done? But who knows? Maybe now that it's out there, it'll just slowly get better for him. But anyhow, it's crazy. But I hope you guys have a good start to the week. I'll see you next time. Why? Starving why?